Hey everyone, welcome back to another video from A Man Talks NRL SuperCoach. In today's video, we're going through the round 11 trade targets and round preview. As ever, lots and lots of stuff to unpack. So if you guys enjoy the video, as ever, would really appreciate a thumbs up on the video. And if you enjoy my content, would really appreciate a subscription to the channel as well if you haven't done so already, as I continue to put out more videos throughout the 2021 SuperCoach season. I'll be putting the audio of this video up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well, if you guys prefer to listen to the audio of this as well. But let's get into the round 11 preview. So a quick shout out to our round 10 top scorer, which was Jedi Knights Victor. He's got a massive 1,599. I'm guessing he captained Nathan Cleary. In our top 5 in our overall group league, we've got Perpetual Motion with James, who's been there for quite a while. He's still killing it, overall ranked at 60. Jackson with Crown Hill at 252 overall rank. Thomas Burgers 271, Andy with Hopper's Fingers at 525, and Matt from England with an overall rank at 565. Guys, the code for the group is in the description below if you guys want to join it as well. So firstly, a quick wrap up of the round 11 Teamless Tuesday. Not as much carnage as we saw last week, which was good to just kind of, a little bit easier to digest for this week. I guess the key ins for Supercoach purposes would be Kurt Capel is back from his HIA and is named to start again in the back row for the Panthers. Latrell Mitchell has come back from his 4-game suspension, so the Rabbitohs outfit overall now looks a lot stronger because as a result of that, Cody Walker moved back to his preferred position at 5'8". Benji Marshall went back to the bench. Sam Williams for the Raiders is starting at 5'8" as well, given their lots of players out of their side for this week. And Brandon Smith has also come back in at dummy half for the Melbourne Storm, with Tyson Smoothy copping an injury as well. And in terms of the key outs this week, for the Dragons, they were the ones who got hit the hardest with all the suspensions and sin bins and etc. Josh Maguire out for 5 games, Ravalawa for 2, Terrell Fumiaono for 5, Tarek Sims for 1. Those are all suspensions. Matt Duffy got that AC joint injury. Initially, it was expected to potentially be a 6-week one, but it could be very soon that he comes back even as close as round 12. Definitely something to keep an eye on, but his injury I don't think has appeared to be as severe as first thought. On the Raiders, as I mentioned, Josh Papali'i with 3-game suspension, Jack Whiten with a 1-game suspension, and Josh Hodgson with a 1-game suspension are all the key outs for them. So the Melbourne Storm coming up definitely against a much weaker Raiders outfit. Speaking of the Storm, Ryan Pappenhausen is the key out. Unfortunately, that concussion and the 6-day turnaround means that he won't be available for selection for the Storm this week, which really bolstered the potential of Nicho Hynes, who we'll definitely be touching on in this video. Josh Curran is also out of the side for this week for the Warriors with that hyperextended elbow, and he is potentially going to be out for 2 to 4 weeks, so definitely something for owners to consider as to what to do with him. For Manly, Kieran Foran is out for the next couple of weeks as well. There was some speculation that Josh Schuster would move into 5'8", but he's still been named in the back row, and Kate Cuss has actually won that 5'8" job. Lachlan Croker moving in at number 9 for the Sea Eagles, and Tyrone Peachey, who was a very popular kind of round 13 playing centre wing option, he's got a 2-game suspension, so definitely going to be causing a lot of headaches for Supercoach owners. And we still have some of those lingering injuries from last week, and suspensions as well. Like your David Fifita, Cam Munster, Harry Grant, they're still probably worthwhile to sell, and obviously still going to be unavailable for this week. So undoubtedly, I think this week, Nicho Hynes is going to be the number one, topic of discussion in terms of whether we should be trading him in this week and who should we actually be trading out for. And one trade that I've seen that's very, very popular is doing like a Daine Laurie to Nicho Hynes, and whether or not that's a good trade. And I think there's definitely some worthwhile discussion I think around that. I'll firstly just start off talking about Nicho Hynes himself and whether or not he's going to be a good prospect to bring in. Long story short, I think he's going to be a good trade. And, I mentioned last week as well that he would be very handy pick up in round 13. And I wish I kind of listened to my own advice because we saw him score a massive 182 last week. And he's got a 3-round average of 116. He's been absolutely killing it, playing that number 1 position for the Storm. Injuries have fallen his way in that he's been able to get an extended run in the team. And that's, anyone who picked him up at 296k a few weeks back is absolutely laughing. So I think the best case situation for Nicho Hynes is, well, this week he's definitely going to be playing fullback with Pappenhausen out of the team. Next week in round 12, if Cam Munster doesn't return from his foot injury or something like that, because he was suspected to be out for about 2 weeks at best. So if Munster doesn't return next week in round 12, you'd expect Nicho Hynes to probably be playing at 5'8", so he'd get another run in the starting team. And then round 13, all the Origin stars from Melbourne would go away on Origin camp, so like Harry Grant, Cam Munster, and again, Nicho Hynes would either be playing at 5'8" or at fullback if Pappenhausen also goes on Origin duties with New South Wales. So you would be looking at a situation where for the next 3 weeks, he's getting an extended run in the team playing at mainly fullback and maybe at 5'8" as well, and that's games against the Raiders, the Broncos, and the Titans. Fantastic games for Nicho Hynes, and he's got a break even of -67, so he's really going to soar in price, and if he maintains his average, he'll go up by 144k in those 3 weeks. So that in that best case situation, he's a fantastic trade and target. The worst case situation is that he'll definitely play this week at fullback, which is still obviously really, really good against a weakened Canberra Raiders outfit. Next week against round 12, the worst case for Nicho Hynes would be that Pappenhausen comes back into the team, plays at fullback, Cam Munster comes back, plays at 5'8", and then Nicho Hynes probably gets relegated back to the bench, and he might have a game where he has 20 minutes and scores maybe 25-30 points, which would really hinder his potential price increase. But then again, he would be playing in round 13, you'd expect, so you are getting that vital round 13 playing number. So even the worst case situation for Nicho Hynes is not a horrible situation really. So I think as a result, I think overall he's a very, very safe trade and target. Now, in terms of doing the Daine Laurie to Nicho Hynes, with Daine Laurie, I think, the obvious reason why people are trading him out is that he's had a couple of low scores in the past few weeks, and he's got a really high break even of 107. So people are looking at that saying, I can make that switch, capitalize on Nicho Hynes' price growth, and avoid Laurie, dipping in price after making quite a bit of money to begin the season so far. With Laurie though, they've got really nice games coming up against the Warriors and then the Dragons. We saw that the Warriors conceded a lot of points to fullbacks just recently with Tom Trbojevic, and they also conceded a lot of points in general. And I think Daine Laurie is well positioned to get really good score in that game and also against the Dragons. The run from round 13 definitely does toughen up for the Tigers. Panthers, Para, Storm, and Souths is a really, really tough month ahead. And then round 17, they don't even play. But I think with Laurie, especially if you're focused on overall, I think having this round 13 playing number is really, really important. And he's shown that he can go big as well. And so I would probably be leaning to holding Laurie and trying to find someone else to trade to Nicho Hynes. I think anyone who doesn't play in round 13, you've got hanging around, if you've got a Bailey Simonson, a Dave Fusatua, if you've made a lot of money, from trading, say, a Ryan Pappenhausen this week or a Dave Fafita, and you've got the money to go from Bailey Simonson to Nicho Hynes or a Dave Fusatua, I 100% would be advocating that move because, as I said, I think overall the situation for Nicho Hynes is pretty solid, and you should hopefully go up quite a bit in value to in the 700k, and then you can flip him in round 14 to a premium centre wing or even a premium fullback, depending on the players you've got in your team, and you can make those dual position players kind of switch around to make that work for you. So I think trading Daine Laurie to Hynes, I can understand the rationale, but I don't think I'd be doing it if you are focused on overall. If you're a head-to-head player, I still think Laurie can perform really well, especially in this next fortnight, but I probably would prefer Hynes to Laurie in that situation. So I think if you're more focused on head-to-head, Laurie to Hynes I think is decent. For overall though, I don't think I'd be doing the Daine Laurie to Nicho Hynes move. Now, the next little situation I've put together is something that I have actually seen online in some forums as well, is should I get rid of King Gutherson for Nicho Hynes? Now, this really, really is intriguing as well. With Gutho, he has had a couple of games where he hasn't really done too well after getting 3 tons. They were tough, slightly, well, not really against the Warriors, I wouldn't call that a tougher game, but the game before that was against the Roosters, so a tough game. He's got Manly this week, and it's really hard to judge how Manly are going to perform in terms of conceding points to opposition fullbacks because they haven't really versed any strong opponents so far, except for the Penrith Panthers. And Dylan Edwards in himself is not really one of those really high upside fullbacks as it is, so we haven't really seen Manly play up against a Teddy or a Pappenhausen, etc. So it's really hard to judge how Gutherson's going to go, and I think Manly, you can consider that a toughish game. And then he's got Rabbitohs, which we know is a tough game as well, but the Rabbitohs do have a tendency to concede points, so I think the Eels might still be able to do okay there. I think the big reason for, people looking to do this Gutherson to Hynes move is that Gutherson is 763k and a massive break even of 171. They're looking at that saying, well, I can do Gutherson to Hynes, pocket almost 200k, and then Hynes is going to go up in value by maybe 140k, and Gutherson might go down by 80k based on some price change calculator if he maintains his average of 82 in the next 3 games. So I can definitely understand it from a financial point of view in terms of capitalizing on the money growth from Hynes versus the loss from Gutherson. But again, similar argument to Laurie. I think if you are focused on overall, Gutherson is probably going to be one of the best kind of round 13 playing fullback options that we have. Obviously, this is all contingent on him not playing Origin, and we don't even know yet the rules in terms of the 18th man for State of Origin and whether they actually have to miss that round 13 week and go to camp with the rest of the team, because that would really obviously, Gutherson probably would be a decent candidate to play 18th man for New South Wales, and then all that benefit of playing around 13 is lost. So I think if you are, willing to take the punt, you can maybe do that Gutherson to Hynes move. And I think another reason why, say someone in my situation, who my fullbacks are Tedesco and Gutherson, watching Tom Tavoyevich rack up these tons and not owning him is really hard to take. And with Manly as well, their draw from round 14 is really strong, and I definitely want to be getting Turbo in at that time. It makes it a lot easier financially if I can go from Gutho to Hynes, ride Hynes' price increase and bridge the gap between going from Hynes to Turbo, because Turbo is looking like he's going to potentially reach the $1 million mark. And if Gutho continues to kind of drop in price, it's going to make that a little bit harder. So for that reason as well, you can potentially look at maybe going to Hynes if you're looking at a bit of a bridge to get to Tommy Turbo. But overall, I think the way that the suspensions are going, we don't know whether how much that's going to continue for the rest of the season, and with so many HIA suspension risk as well, I think saving trades is really important. So I think doing this extra trade, maybe Gutho to Hynes and then Hynes to Turbo, might not be worth it unless I really see Hynes outscoring Gutho by like 150-200 points in the next 3 games, and I just don't see that quite happening. So it is a bold move, and it would create a lot of money. I just don't think I'd be doing it myself, but definitely is something to consider if you are looking to go really punty and get off Gutho and get onto Nicho Hynes. So the next kind of player of concern, I think, is Taukeiaho. I had to put the pun, is his benching a KO for TKO. The minutes really is a big concern in the past couple of weeks, especially last week. He only played 35 minutes against the Cowboys. Potentially this is a thing with the Roosters in that they might be protecting him. He's only just kind of coming back from that rib injury, and maybe they're saving him for like a tougher opponent for him to play bigger minutes, because obviously they lost Lindsay Collins recently, and I really thought with that his minutes were going to continue to be higher. But being named on the bench has been really strange, and the lack of goal kicking that he had at the beginning of the season has really killed his kind of prospects at being a gun front row forward. So he's definitely being very heavily sold this week, and I can completely understand why. In terms of the potential trade out options, there's a few that you could look to in front row forward. So I've identified maybe 3 potential avenues you can go with your front row forward replacements for Taukeiaho. James Fisher-Harris is probably going to be the most popular option, I think, to bring in, given that he's had a couple of really nice weeks where he scored pretty big, but he did score tries in both those games, so I would definitely take that into consideration in terms of his 3-round average, which is 82, which is really strong. Fisher-Harris obviously always has really strong base. I think he's been averaging around 50 to 51 points in base stats, which is really solid. A solid floor to work off with for Fisher-Harris. The problem is his minutes have been kind of down as well. He's been playing sub 50 minutes at times. Like it was a couple of weeks ago, he only played like 38 minutes and then played 48 last week. And I would be hoping for a bit more than that to just kind of really be able to get the most points production out of him. But if he's scoring above 80, with the ability to score tries as well, you can't really knock that too much. For me, I don't know how appealed I am by Fisher-Harris. This happened to me last year where he had a run of games where he was doing really well. I bought him in, I think it was around round 10, so I think it was kind of around a similar time, and then he just went on a run where he was giving me like 44, 50, 48, 50, and nothing more than that, which was basically, he was just getting only base stats, and he wasn't even doing like offloading or tackle breaking. And I think the past couple of weeks, his scores have really been inflated by those, by those tries, which probably also would include like line breaks and stuff as well. So I would definitely be considering that, this try for him. I think that try that he scored a couple of weeks ago was his first in like over a year, some really long time. I can't quite remember how long it was. So all of a sudden, I wouldn't be thinking that, this is going to be a reoccurring thing. I guess the appealing thing with Fisher-Harris is that he does play round 13. That's probably the main thing as to why people are grabbing him. So for that reason alone, I think he's fine, because he's probably going to get you 55 to 60 points in that round 13 week, which could be absolutely vital. So for all those reasons that I just said, knocking on him, potentially, his points could be a bit inflated due to those tries, and his minutes are a bit down. He's still going to be a decent option, I think, for round 13. So I think this Taukeiaho to Fisher-Harris move is pretty solid. I just don't think I'm going to be doing it myself. Another way that you could be approaching it is going with like a Luke Thompson, who's been doing really well recently. Apologies, in this table I've got him at 303k. That's just a mistype. he's actually priced around 509k, so he's a bit cheaper than Fisher Harris. He scored 75 last week, and he's definitely producing, being the best, most consistent option in SuperCoach points for the Bulldogs. And he's averaging 68, which is really strong for a front row forward, and basically all in base stats. One thing I would note with him is obviously the Bulldogs don't play in round 13, so if you're looking for overall, it's not really ideal in that he doesn't provide an additional number in that bye week. But it's a really great pickup, I think, for round 14 and 15 if you can continue this point scoring, because he will be kind of a handy 17th or 18th man, and maybe your third front row forward that you can run with for the rest of the season. I would also just note that he has been playing in this Bulldogs outfit without Jack Hetherington and without Josh Jackson, who I think potentially could eat into his minutes when they do come back. Hetherington comes back from his suspension in round 12, and according to NRL.com, Josh Jackson potentially may be coming back into the lineup in round 12 as well. So definitely, I think there's no need to rush into him. He's got a break even of 43, so probably will go up a little bit in price. But I would want to be looking at how his minutes are shaping up when there's more middles kind of coming back into that Bulldogs lineup, and then reassessing. And I think the fact that he doesn't play round 13 means it's pretty safe to just not have to rush him into your team straight away. And I think you can look to pick him up in round 14 and 15 once you get a better idea of his minute situation. Now, if you're looking for a kind of a front row forward trade to kind of maybe free up some money but still also make up the round 13 numbers, Thomas Flegler from the Broncos could be a potential option. He's been named at lock again this week after being at lock last week, and he scored I think 51 points last week, which was pretty solid, and he's got a 3-round average of 43, which is for at his price is fairly decent. That's basically what Taukeiaho got 24 last week, so I think if you're paying 150k less for Flegler and getting an average of 43 over Taukeiaho, you definitely will take that. He's got a pretty decent base PPM at 0.84, which is a little bit less than Taukeiaho and actually not quite as good as Fisher Harris and Luke Thompson. But again, this is probably also taking into account there probably were some games that he was coming off the bench that would be distorting his stats just a little bit. He's got a break even of 8, so you'd expect him to start going up a little bit in value. So he could be one of those kind of mid-range front row forward options that you go to, who might be a bit of a slow burn, might make you maybe 50 to 60k, be a handy number in round 13 to net you like 40, 45 points, and maybe a stepping stone then to like a Tom Flegler to a Luke Thompson move. You could potentially go like that. If you've got maybe an extra couple of trades that you've managed to save throughout the season, and you can afford to do a bit of a downgrade and then do another trade to flip him to one of these other front row forwards, I think you could potentially do that with Tom Flegler, and with Pat Carrigan being out for the rest of the season, if he still maintains this lock position, he should be getting some reliable minutes and starts, and his points production should be he should be priced lower than what his points is going to be, basically, so he's providing good value is what I'm trying to say. So I think you can definitely go that route as well for Taukeiaho. I think if I had to choose out of any of these three for Taukeiaho, I'd probably go with Fisher Harris, just because I think he's probably going to be the most safe and plays round 13 as well. So I think he's probably the one that I would go for if I had to trade out Taukeiaho this week. In terms of if Taukeiaho is a sell, he probably is a sell. One thing that is stopping me though is that he has dropped quite a lot in price to 455k, and I'm just hoping maybe for some bigger minutes in tougher games, because he could potentially kind of come around and be a decent play in round 17, which is definitely looking like a tougher bye week to kind of manage in terms of the players to get. So I'm potentially thinking about maybe just holding him. I won't play him in my 17, but just let him sit there because he's already lost so much money, and maybe look at other players to trade around in my front row forward. Now, the next player who I think a lot of people will be looking to trade out potentially this week is Josh Curran. And I think a very similar argument with Taukeiaho in that he was looking like a very, very handy round 17 playing option. He was averaging 64. He had the ability to get some attacking stats, and he was averaging a very, very solid base as well. But there was some concern in that he was benched last week, but he's now got an injury and he should be out for about 2 to 4 weeks. So the question I think is whether he's going to be a hold or a sell. I think 2 to 4 weeks is quite a lot of time. I think he's only really a hold if you can manage to, cover him around your team. Otherwise, he's probably a sell, and there are definitely going to be some interesting replacements for him in the second row forward position. We spoke a lot about him last week, but I think Ryan Madison is probably going to be the standout for me, given that he's come back from his kind of layoff from his concussion. He's come back with some very, very decent scores. Scored 75 last week, including a try, and he was very close to scoring a second, which would have netted him a 90 plus score. So I think Madison definitely has that attacking potential. Plays in round 13 bye week. I don't think that he would be playing Origin. There has been some potential talk, but in my opinion, I don't think he'll be kind of hanging around that New South Wales back row unless there are some injuries. I think Crichton and Frizzell probably have locked down that position. With a break even of 53 and a 3-round average of 73, I think it's a great week to target getting Ryan Madison, and definitely I'll be looking to get him in. He's definitely going to be one of the main trade targets in for me this week, and I don't think I have to talk about him too much more. He's a proven SuperCoach gun. We can get him at a pretty cheap price at 585k, so I think if you can afford Josh Curran to Ryan Madison, I think that's a fantastic trade, and I definitely would be advocating that. Another guy that we can look to is Jason Taumalolo. Now, with Taumalolo, I mentioned that in my roundup video, he's still apparently suffering a bit of pain from his fractured hands, that potentially might be limiting his impact. What we really want to see from Taumalolo, I think, is his minutes, and we have seen that in the past 2 weeks. Encouragingly, we've seen in his first game back from that extended injury layoff, he played 71 minutes, and then last week he played 64. So the minutes are definitely there to potentially justify a trade-in, but the points just haven't quite been there yet. Obviously, the week before last, he scored like 100 plus. That didn't include a try. So yeah, I would kind of be looking more just at the base stats. His break-even's 57, so I think he'll kind of maybe hover around this 582k if he kind of matches the same level of output that he did last week. You could go early on him as a bit of a pod move to go for Taumalolo, but I think when you've got guys like Ryan Madison, who do play in the round 13 bye week, I think he's a lot more of a better trade-in target than a Taumalolo at this point in time. The way I see Taumalolo, he's a perfect round 14 or 15 trade-in target, because you know that the Cowboys will play in the round 17 bye week. You won't play State of Origin, and if we see the good signs from the next couple of weeks as well, you can lock him in at probably maybe only a little bit more expensive, maybe like 600k, and you lock him in for the rest of the season. And you can, if you've got like a Mitch Barnett to Taumalolo in round 14, it's probably going to be one of the most popular trades, and that'll be a very easy switch. So that's probably the way that I would play it with Taumalolo. But you can go early on him if you've already got, say, like a Madison, a Papali'i, these guys who already are good players in round 13. One second row forward I did want to mention as well is Brandon Smith. He's coming back from his suspension this week. And the Storm have got a great draw, as I outlined when I was talking about Nicho Hynes. And with no Harry Grant, you'd expect potentially bigger minutes for Brandon Smith. Although we did say that at the beginning of the season, but we didn't see the points really match the minutes that we were hoping for. But with really nice games coming up against the Raiders, Broncos, and Titans, there might be some attacking stats on offer for Smith. In the 2 games before his suspension, I think he was scoring in the 60s, which is pretty handy. And I think Curran to Brandon Smith is obviously less of a jump in terms of price. And he will play in round 13, so he can make the numbers. He's a Kiwi, he won't play State of Origin. He's got a break even of 49, so I don't think you have to jump on him this week, if you want to do other trades. And with Curran as well, if you don't decide to trade him this week, he's not playing, so he won't change in value, so it's safer to hold. You don't have to risk his price dropping. So I think Brandon Smith could be an enticing proposition, if you want to take a look at him this week. But he could be a very handy number in round 13 as well. And even throughout the Origin period, given that you'd expect that Harry Grant would be away on duty with the Maroons, and there might potentially be some rest for him. So Brandon Smith might get an extended stint at number 9, and that might mean increased minutes as well. So I think Smith is an interesting proposition as well if you're looking for a replacement for Josh Curran. Now, I'll quickly touch on Josh Schuster as well, who I think is, obviously was a very, very hot discussion point last week, and a lot of people would have done that Josh Schuster to Tyson Gamble trade, and unfortunately that just didn't work out. There really seems like there's a bit of a lack of decent 5'8 options, and I think as we get closer to State of Origin, the appeal of someone like a Jerome Loy also lessens, with the greater risk that he plays State of Origin and he misses that round 13 bye week. And Adam Doueihi, his price just keeps soaring, and it gets a little bit harder to reach him. Adam Doueihi is probably the best replacement at 5'8 for Josh Schuster if you're looking for a guarantee of a 5'8 that plays in round 13. But he's priced at 664k. Doueihi, his break-even is minus 14, so he's going to keep going up in price. As I kind of mentioned with Laurie, the next 2 games for the Tigers are really, really nice. The Warriors and then the Dragons. But I just keep thinking about that round 13 run from, the run from round 13, sorry. Panthers, Melbourne, South, and Eels, I think it was. It's just a really, really tough month, and then they don't play in round 17. Obviously, Dewey's going to be a perfect stepping stone. You can ride that that price rise, capitalize on the points in the next fortnight, and then you can trade him down to like a Cody Walker or a Sean Johnson potentially, a 5-8 that does play in round 17. That could definitely be a viable strategy. So I still think that Dewey is a good trade in target, but I just don't think I can afford it myself. So for me personally, I think Schuster I'm probably just going to hold, and potentially even through the round 13 bye week as well. Para is obviously a tough game this week. Knights, though, they've been conceding quite a few points, and the run-in for Manly from round 14 is fantastic, really. They've got the Cowboys, the Titans, the Bulldogs, and then the Raiders, and the Raiders haven't shown that much so far in the past few weeks. So I think there's definitely some good attacking points on offer for someone like a Schuster. And also, if he does get a stint at 5'8", with Kieran out of the side, we might see some extra attacking stats from him. So I think he's probably an okay hold. And if you were selling him, it probably was last week. But I think if you can get from Schuster to Dewey, I would advocate that trade. The only other option that I might think of doing as well is via Connor Watson, is like a Josh Schuster to a Reed Marnie trade. Reed Marnie has kind of had a bit of a reduced points output in the past few weeks. He only scored 45 last week, and he's got a really, really high break even of 115. So you'd expect that he's probably going to leak some more cash in the next few weeks. So I think if you are looking to still fill in the numbers in round 13, I think a Schuster to Reed Marnie trade come round 12, 13, when Reed Marnie's price really has tanked, is really going to be a solid trade. Schuster's break even is 72, which isn't that high, and he's definitely got a decent chance at reaching that. So I think his price is going to hover maybe around the 450, 60k mark, whereas Marnie might drop to sub 500 if his break even keeps being this high. So I think that's definitely a decent trade-in strategy as well, and that's definitely something I'm looking to doing as well, given that I don't think I can stretch from a Schuster to Dewey. So some other quick questions as well that we'll cover off is like Ryan Papenhuyzen, is he a sell? He's probably going to be a sell given that he's missing this week. We're not quite sure yet if he'll come back in round 12, which it is against the Broncos, which is a game that you would want him for. But then round 13 he's probably going to play Origin, and I think with a break even, I think in like 180, he's probably going to be a sell. Now, in terms of the cheapies, it's not really a great week for cheapies. I think Javid Bowman is one who's heavily bought as he's a sender for the Cowboys, playing his third game. But I think with Justin O'Neill and Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow, they're both tipped for a round 13 return. So I think Javid Bowman is probably going to make way out of that Cowboy side relatively soon. And I don't think you're going to be making that much money out of him. So I wouldn't be advocating a Javid Bowman trade in myself. Max Fiangai, he's named on the wing again with Dufty out of the team, with Cody Ramsey named at fullback. So you might get a few games in, but the security is really dependent, I think, on Dufty's injury and when he returns. Also bear in mind that Ravalawa will be out for the next couple of weeks, but then I expect when he comes back and also Jordan Pereira comes back, then Max Fiangai is probably going to drop out of the 17 for the Dragons. So I don't think he's a great cheapie prospect either. Keenan Palacia from the Broncos, he's been given a run in the starting lineup with Jordan Ricky out through suspension, so he's definitely someone to monitor if his game time continues, as he could be someone who plays in the round 13 bye week as well. And finally, we've got Dean Aramia from the Storm, who's 173k cheapie. I can't actually remember if he's named in the 17, but you'd expect with Josh Adokar and Ryan Papenhuyzen playing Origin in round 13, being an Origin camp in round 13, Dean Aramia could come onto the wing in replacement of Adokar, and a pretty decent game in round 13 against the Titans. So he could be one of those guys that you just pick up for 173k, just let him play in that week, and then he just kind of becomes a player who doesn't play for the rest of the year. But 173k, that's not too bad because that's bottom dollar. So that could be a potential cheapie as well, if you're not really too confident in these other guys. But it's not a great week with cheapies, that's for sure. So we'll get into the round 11 vice captain and captain candidates. As we saw last week, the captaincy and throughout this whole season has been so important in terms of really boosting your round score and your overall rank. With Cleary 225, the week before Turbo 191, Papenhuyzen 197. The list goes on, so I think this is a super important section, so I really try to put some thought into this and not just chuck random names on a list. It may seem that way though for the first 4 guys that I've got here. The VC options really aren't that great, and it's really about the back half of this round, I think, where our big hitters are going to be coming in. But I still wanted to put some kind of maybe poddish VC captain candidates. The first game of the round, Knights versus Cowboys. Looking into the stats, I think Jaden Brayley's been the most consistent player from the Knights that we can probably consider. Cowboys have been pretty middle of the road in terms of defending hooker position, and Jaden Brayley's been averaging around 74, so it's pretty safe if you want to go for a really safe VC score. But to be honest, I don't think that's going to be a great VC candidate. And from the Cowboy side, if you wanted to consider someone, you can go with like maybe a Val Holmes, as the Knights have definitely shown the capability of leaking a lot of points. But Brayley, if you're looking for someone from the Knights, could be maybe a decent VC option. Tigers versus the Warriors, I think the best option is either going to be Adam Doueihi or Dave Nofaluma. So Adam Doueihi probably I would edge over Nofaluma, given that the Warriors concede the second most points to centres. And I've put the centre stat for Doueihi, given that's where he's playing, which is why it's also applicable for Nofaluma, as he also plays in that kind of centre wing position. Because of Doueihi's goal kicking, I'd have to give the edge to him. We've seen in the past 2 weeks he can easily crack a ton. So I think the Warriors have been conceding a lot of points. So I think Doueihi is probably going to be the perfect VC candidate option. And you can put that because they play on a Friday, and I think on the first game on the Friday. So he's a very, very safe VC candidate in my opinion. If I owned him, I'd be putting the VC on him. In also the same game, we've got Cody Nikorima, who has shown an ability this season to get really, really big scores, like in the 100 plus. Tigers themselves aren't that great in terms of defending, and they do concede a lot of points as well. They've been the 5th worst team at defending the halfback 5'8" position. So Nikorima, who also goal kicks, could have a really high ceiling in this game. He's coming for 66 last week against the Eels, which the Eels are a very tough opponent. So 66 is not horrible. So I think for VC as well, if you're going really, really pod, you could go with Nikorima, but I don't think too many people would own him. So I think Doueihi's probably going to be a bit more of a relevant VC option. Finally, again, this is very, very poddish, but it's AJ Brimson against the Bulldogs. Given that they're versing the Bulldogs, I felt entitled to put someone from the Titans, and the Bulldogs have been the 4th worst team at defending fullbacks. Brimson has had a very up and down season. He's had shown glimpses of what made him a really good Supercoach player at the back end of last season, but he's had a lot of games where he just hasn't really done too much. Last week was one of those where he only scored 47, albeit it was against the Penrith Panthers, who are the best team in the comp, in my opinion. So Brimson could be a big bounce back game against the Bulldogs, who just concede points in general. So he could really be a decent VC option, but again, I don't think he's going to be very heavily owned, so he's probably not going to be that relevant. I think now is when we start getting into probably the real kind of meat and potatoes of our VC captain options. So the first game that I'd probably really consider someone is Sam Walker and James Tedesco, with the Roosters taking on the Broncos. Given that this is probably the first matchup, I think that at least myself could realistically vice captain someone. You could vice captain one of these two guys, or you could just put the straight captaincy on them as well. So I think either way, you're not going to get too wrong with that. Broncos have been the worst team in the comp at defending halfbacks and fullbacks, which is why I've got Sam Walker and Tedesco. Tedesco, we know what he can do. He scored 132 last week, and that didn't include a try. The guy just showed us, he probably heard all the turbo chatter, and was like, let me just show you guys, don't forget about me. I'm still the number 1 fullback in New South Wales, at least in Freddie Fittler's eyes. And Sam Walker, who goal kicks, he really could have a monster score, and we saw him get 163 against the Knights, so he's definitely got that ceiling in him. So I think one of these two definitely can be very, very reliable captain options. I think a lot of people will go straight captaincy on Tedesco. I just might go vice captain myself, but I haven't made that decision yet. But I think Sam Walker, Tedesco, fantastic options this week. Nicho Hynes making his debut on the captaincy shout, coming up against the Raiders, who have severely weakened. They've been the 5th worst at defending fullbacks as well. So I think Nicho Hynes could have another great game. He's coming off 182. Do I need to say any more? Nicho Hynes has obviously shown that ability to get a really high ceiling. He's going to be very heavily traded in this week, so he could really be a pod captaincy option as well, or even a vice captain, of course. So I think Nicho Hynes, again, this probably, you might not put the captaincy on him, but this might, help your decision as to whether to bring him in, given that the Raiders are really good at conceding points to fullbacks. Now, the man of the moment, Nathan Cleary, against the Rabbitohs, who have been obviously a very decent defence. They've been middle of the road in terms of defending points to halfbacks, but to be honest, I wouldn't consider that really at all. I mentioned this last week. The stat, I think, against the Titans was that the Titans were the 10th worst team. So there was only like 4 or 5 other teams that were better at defending halfback in terms of points conceded than the Titans. And Nathan Cleary said, stuff that, I'm going to score 225. So I think someone like Cleary, he's a bit of a unicorn. It doesn't matter really who he versus. He's always going to be a very, very safe captain option. I think the way that I'm probably leaning myself this week is probably a vice captain Tedesco and a captain Cleary, because I think he's safe as houses. He can easily rack up 90, 100 plus. Do I need to say anymore? It's Nathan Cleary. He's got 225. I think he's going to be a great captain option. The last game of the round is really, really enticing, and it's one that I'm really interested to see how it plays out, just in terms of an overall NRL perspective as well. Sea Eagles against the Eels. Manly have been the second worst team at defending fullbacks this season. I do think a lot of that though comes from the early parts of the season when they didn't have Turbo, and were just getting absolutely hammered. I think Teddy scored 162 against them in the first game of the season. So I don't know how much I would read into that statistic that they've been the second worst team at defending fullbacks, but potentially that might mean that there's some big points on offer for Clint Gutherson. So I think you can really go for a pod captain option on Gutherson. But I think, to be honest, I've got him on this list here, but I think I would consider the likes of Turbo, Cleary, and Tedesco Walker over Gutherson. So I think unless you're really, really going for a differential pod, I don't think I'd be going for Gutherson, even though that Manly have seemed to concede a lot of points to fullbacks. And finally, the man Tom Trbojevic against the Eels. Eels have been a very, very staunch defence to fullbacks. 14th best in the comp. 14th worst in the comp. So basically, there's only been two other teams that are better at defending fullbacks than the Eels. So this really is going to be a big, big test for Turbo. We did see in his other tough game against the Panthers, he scored 68, which is obviously a very, very solid floor. But apart from his other games where he's cracking tons, we'll see maybe this might be the second game that he doesn't get a ton. So I think captaining Turbo is probably still going to be safe. I think we know that the guy's a freak, and he can score 100 plus against anyone. He's matchup proof. But I think I'd probably be leaning towards like a Cleary. If I didn't own like a Tedesco, I would probably captain Cleary over a Turbo, but just purely because it's the Eels and it's a pretty tough defense. And I would think that Turbo probably isn't going to reach the heights that we've seen in the past 2 weeks. Although in saying that, we saw Reece Walsh get 100 against the Eels last week, and he was kind of playing fullback. So I think Trbojevic, he could actually get 100 plus, but I think I'd still prefer a Cleary or a James Tedesco. Just keep that in mind if you are captaining Turbo, and that his ceiling might not be quite as high as what we've seen in the past other few weeks. Now, in the final part of the video, I'll just go through the break-evens for all the teams and players. Really happy to see that a lot of you guys commented last week that you were happy to see the break-evens, because I wasn't actually quite sure if they were still relevant, but I'll definitely continue to keep them in the videos given the positive feedback I got on that. So from the Broncos, I think, as I mentioned, the main one is probably going to be Tom Flegler, who's got a break-even of 8. So it's a really good week to pick him up because he will probably start to go up in value quite a bit, and he can be a decent mid-range front row forward option. In terms of the other more popular players from the Broncos, Jermaine Asako has got a break-even of 100. So if you were looking for a round 13 playing centre, you could maybe wait on Asako, given that they've also got really tough games against the Roosters and then the Storm. So I would expect him to go well below that break-even of 100. So he might be a good one to pick up after the next fortnight in round 13. And hopefully he's lost a bit of cash and you can pick him up at a bit of a discounted price. I would say a similar logic with Tafita Pangai Jr., who's got a break-even of 98. Tough games. I don't know how well he's going to do, especially against the Storm. Roosters might concede some points on an edge, but I think you can do the same approach. If you haven't got him in already, I think it's safe to wait a fortnight before looking to get him in into your front row forward or second row forward. On the Bulldogs, as I've kind of touched on, I think the main consideration is going to be Luke Thompson, who's got a break-even of 43, which I think is very, very gettable. So if you are really keen on getting him, it's a good week to do so, as you probably will start to creep up a bit more in price as well. On the Raiders, Bailey Simonson's got a break-even of 2, so I know a lot of people would probably be looking to maybe do a Simonson to Hynes trade. Even though Simonson's break-even is very, very low, I still think that Simonson to Hynes trade is very good. But if you can afford to hold Simonson, I think it's okay. He should go up one more time in value. Try and make as much money out of as you can out of him. I don't know what his break-even would be the next week, but he did have that big score last week. Sorry, not last week, the week before last. So once that score does drop out of his rolling average, I'd expect that break even to go quite high. So potentially next week, if you're not looking to trade him out this week, you can probably wait till next week, get his price up a little bit more, and then you can look to trade him out. And I guess the other main guy would probably be like a Ryan James. He's got a break even of 47. With Papali'i out of the team, maybe Ryan James gets a few more minutes and might get to creep up to that 47. He's been kind of hovering around the mid-30s. So if he does, hopefully he can at least hold his value. maybe if he's able to jag a try or something, he can go up a bit in price, but I'm not too hopeful of that. And Corey Haruo-Naira, CHN, it's got a break even of 22, price at 375k. I gave some thoughts on him in a video a couple of weeks back. I think he's played 80 minutes since he's come back into the starting lineup, so I think he's been pretty safe. Again, he's one of these guys though that I think when you're prioritizing round 13 playing options, he obviously doesn't fall into that category, but I think he's still a handy pickup with a break even of 22, probably going to go up a little bit in price, so I think he's a safe mid-range second row forward option, although I probably would prefer maybe like a Liam Martin or even like a Satili Tupanua instead, if I was looking in that price category for a second row forward, or maybe even a Brandon Smith. On the Dragons, again, there's probably not going to be too much relevance now that they've got so many players out of consideration. I guess with the vast number of players who are out of suspension, I would just be keeping an eye on the team list for potential cheapies who crop up. Jack Bird is probably going to be one guy who might get some interest because the Dragons run-in is very, very nice now for the next few weeks. He's got a break-even of 17, so I think he's an okay pickup for this week as well for your centre wing if you're looking to add a round 13 player. Given that break-even, he's probably going to go up in price, and the Dragons draw is really, really nice for the next month or so. From the Sea Eagles, similar, familiar targets, Jason Saab, a minus 38 break even. I can't believe it. This guy's going to get to 500k, and I look like a fool now for selling him, but anyway, Saab, he'll make you more money. Keep him in your team. Tom Trbojevic, this is crazy. He's got he's 831k, and he's got a minus 9 break even. If he cracks a ton against the Eels, we could easily see him get to maybe $1 million. Which, that little section I talked about before, from like doing Gutho to Hynes to Turbo, just to be able to, bridge the gap. This is the reason why. Minus 9 break even at that price already, he very, very easily could get to the $1 million mark. Obviously, I probably wouldn't be buying it at $1 million. It's just going to be really, really hard to watch Turbo and not own him. As I mentioned, Josh Schuster, he's got a break even of 72, so I think that's not too out of reach for him. So I think he's okay to hold, given that I don't think he's going to be changing in price that much. Again, Nicho Hynes, minus 67 break even. He's going to make a lot of money. Josh Adokar is actually someone as well who I didn't touch on, who will play obviously in these nice easy games, but I expect him to be playing State of Origin, and I wouldn't be buying Josh Adokar at 668k. I think if you wanted to buy him, the time was just after he got that 6-try effort. I think the time's a bit past that now. And as I touched on with Ryan Papenhuyzen, a break even of 192, which we know he can get, but at 815k, I think a Ryan Papenhuyzen down to a James Tedesco makes so much sense this week. You can pocket 300k, get a nice juicy matchup against the Broncos, and use that money to go Bailey Simonson to Nicho Hynes. That's probably a good pair of trades, so I think Papenhuyzen with that high break even is probably a sell. On the night side, there's not too much interest given that the way that they've been playing. I think Bradman Best is probably someone who I did kind of, spruce up as a bit of a good good centre wing consideration, but he just hasn't been doing that well. He's got a break even of 76, so he could be really, really cheap come round 13, and that's probably the only reason I'd probably get him in if he becomes that cheap, because so far he's been producing good base stats, but he's just not getting the attacking stats like the try line, the try assists to justify getting him into our centre wing. But if he comes in that cheap, then it might be worthwhile. On the Cowboys, Javid Bowen, obviously with a minus 37 break even, very, very popular trade-in target for this week, but I've already given my thoughts on him, and I think there are some job security issues there, so I don't think I'd be going for him. Val Holmes got a break even of 92, but I think now we're so close to State of Origin, I don't think now is really the time to pick him up. Just keep monitoring that break even though he could be a very handy pickup for around 14-15. As he's shown, he's a very, very decent centre wing consideration. For the Eels, probably someone I'm going to touch on a little bit more next week is going to be Mitch Moses. He's got a break even of 28, and I think he's going to be a very, very good kind of round 13 playing halfback option if you are looking to move off Sam Walker. I'll touch on a little bit more on Sam Walker in the next part when we get onto the Roosters break evens, but I think Mitch Moses could be a decent round 13 playing halfback consideration. Isaiah Papali'i with a break even of 131, he's probably going to start going down in price, and then I probably, obviously in hindsight, probably shouldn't have gone from last week, but it was too tempting against the Warriors, so whatever, I accept the decision. But if you haven't got him yet, I think you can hopefully see his price start to go down if he keeps hitting these 50 scores instead of the 125s that we were seeing. And Ryan Madison with a very nice break even of 53, I think is a great trade and target for this week with a very achievable break even. From the Panthers, Charlie Staines with a minus 43 break even, very, very nice to see. He should start going up in price, as will Stephen Crichton with a minus 25 break even. 506k, he could also be someone that you could plug into your round 13 centers, but as I mentioned a little bit last week, I really prefer the wingers. They seem to be getting all the tries and all the base, not Charlie Staines, but other wingers do. So I would probably prefer other center wings to Stephen Crichton. Like I went for a Matt Ikuvalu last week over a Stephen Crichton. Nathan Cleary minus 19, 864k. He also could be our $1 million man, him and Turbo. So wouldn't be doing anything with those two except keeping him in your team. On the Shark side, to be honest, there's not really anyone I'm really considering, so I'm just going to really kind of skip over them. From the Rabbitohs, we've got Taine Milne, who's got a break even of 3. I can't quite remember how many games he's played, but if he's about to play his third game, he might be a good cheapie consideration. I just haven't done enough insight, or I haven't looked into him too much to really recommend him. On the Roosters, as I mentioned, James Tedesco's got a break even of 5, so he's definitely going to be getting his price in the right direction. So I think, as I mentioned, Pappenhausen down to Tedesco is a great trade, even maybe a Gutho to Tedesco, but I think Gutho will probably play in round 13, so I don't think I'd be doing that trade. Now, the main guy I probably do want to talk out of the Roosters was Sam Walker. He's got a break even of 131 and 629k really. He's made like 460, 70k, something like that. So he's made so much money. I think this week is not the week to be selling Sam Walker though, if you are looking to, given that they're coming up against the Broncos. As I mentioned, I think Sam Walker is a potential captain consideration, so I don't see any reason why I'd be selling him this week. But I think next week, definitely we're going to be talking a little bit more about Sam Walker trade targets, because I think a lot of people will probably be looking to sell him next week for like a Jerome Hughes or for like a Mitch Moses. But I think for this week, even though they've got that really high break even, I would ignore that and happily play in your 17 against the Broncos. With the Titans, I don't think there's anyone really to discuss. Tyrone Peachey, if you do own him, I think he's probably going to be a hold. He will miss the next 2 games, but playing in the round 13 bye week I think is very crucial. So I think I would just hold it, and hopefully you have some other cover in your centre wing in his absence. And David Fifita, break even of 145. If you didn't sell him this last week, I think he's still a good sell for this week, given that he's got that really, really high price tag. Out of the Warriors, given that they don't play in round 13, I don't think you're really going to be looking at these guys up until maybe round 14 if you're focused on overall. One guy who I do really like is Chanel Harris-Tavita, a bit of a pod in the halves. He's priced at 417k, he's got a break even of 20, so I think if you were looking to go for him early as pod, now could be a good week, given that he's probably going to go up in price with that low break even. And finally, on the Tigers, as I mentioned, Adam Doueihi, minus 14 break even versus Daine Laurie. He's got 107 break even. I've given my reasons as to why I probably would hold Daine Laurie, and I still think Adam Doueihi is a great buy with a minus 14. And one other guy was Sean Bloor. So Sean Bloor had his first game last week, and he only scored 14 points in around 20 minutes, I think. So his break even's 34. I think preseason he was a very popular kind of cheapie in second row forward, but I think it really depends on him playing bigger minutes on an edge. Coming on playing 20 minutes is not going to do anything really as a cheapie prospect in terms of a cash cow. So I think there's no rush to bring him in. I think definitely you can wait for this week, even the week after. He probably won't go up that much in price if his break even hangs around that 35. But I would definitely be monitoring him, because I think if he does seem like he gets a stint playing 80 minutes, he'd be a great cash cow option at that point in time. And Nofaluma, I think, is a good trade and target. Break even of 29 at 540k. Playing in round 13. His base stats have been a little bit lower than previous years. His base is about 29 a game. And also playing next to Doueihi. Doueihi loves to run himself. He doesn't really pass that much. So that could hinder Nofaluma, but I still think Nofaluma is an okay trade and target for this week as well, given that the Tigers have a nice set of 2 games and they're playing round 13. Well, that's it, guys. That's the round 11 trade targets and round preview. Apologies if my voice was going in and out. I had a bit of a really bad sore throat last week and a bit of a cold. Still just a bit on the mend, but hopefully you guys are able to sit through that and got some value out of this in terms of some trade and targets for this week. If you did, would really appreciate a thumbs up on the video. Do please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. But until then, see you guys in the next video.